to the lightning round.
Welcome.
Well, hello, and welcome to the Dave Kershner Lightning Round podcast. I am your host. It is episode 67. We are finishing up week 61 of this this guy. We're currently embroiled 15 months into the 46th Quadrennial Hunger Games. I was on vacation last week. The midweek show was a review of my new scope. All things considered, it went pretty well. I just really had a hard time with the lack of instruction. I wouldn't have thought that a piece of equipment that cost as much as that did would come with little to no instructions, and I had to rely on online sources to find a user guide, to find tutorials, to find videos on how to get into the menus and how to operate the digital scope. So, but all in all, it was a decent piece of equipment. It was a good purchase. It can be charged using a USB cable. And a small portable solar panel. So you don't have to worry about trying to, make sure you got the right batteries, or the infrared illuminator, though, it does take these small little C batteries. I've never seen anything like that before, but those are, you can get rechargeable ones of those as well. But, that's the way it is. So while I was on vacation and I was down at the coast, I mentioned this in episode 66, at the tail end of episode 66, that, it was an interesting cross-section. So you had land developers, you had lawyers, you had civil engineers, you had concrete guys, roofing guys, and I was just friend of the family. I was the tag along. I was representing IT, man. Woohoo! No. But my buddy outed me last year. He was joking around and his dad overheard. And he was like, "Oh, you freaking prepper," and his dad was like, "What's going on here?" And so it became this thing. So, last year's attendees were like, "Dude, you gotta write a book about something. Include some of this, And I was like, "Oh, I am. Don't worry. You can't find better characters to base. You can't find better real life personas to base characters on." So I started writing a book. It's called Borderless, and it basically weaves in the narrative of the pandemic. I actually started that book 2 or 3 years before coronavirus. So there you go. But I was focused on getting other stuff done. But I did hear from the narrator. The narrator has started part 5. He's completed the first chapter. And I reviewed that. I got in a little bit of trouble because when I gave him my feedback and my notes, I didn't like how he was pronouncing a certain word. The word was secreted, and he wanted to say it as secreted. And I said it's not an oozing pustule, so therefore it is not secreting. It is not secreted. It is hidden, meaning secret. So the word is pronounced secreted. But because I can't find anybody to pronounce that coming from the Webster's Dictionary or the Oxford Dictionary, we went back and forth. I got in a little bit of trouble, and I was a little short with him. I was also trying to do my day job. I was trying to keep my assignment happy. I was trying to keep my employer happy. I was trying to figure out when I could do the podcast and what topics to cover. So I did have to apologize to him, and so hopefully he'll continue with the recordings, but I haven't heard back from him. So hopefully he's moving forward, but I don't know. I can't guarantee anything. But if you would like free copies of parts 1 through 4 on audio, shoot me an email at djkpublishinghouse@gmail.com, and I will send you codes to go to the Audible website and download free copies of parts 1 through 4. My only ask, my caveat, is that if I give you these codes, when you finish a particular part, 1, 2, 3, 4, you go back to either Amazon or Audible and leave a review. That's it. So, but while I was at the coast, there was actually one guy there. He was an actor, which actually it kind of piqued my curiosity. I composed myself, and I didn't kind of force myself on him to ask him a bunch of questions, because I would love to see my book series made into a movie. I think they could take 3 books and condense it down to a trilogy. It'd be an original piece of work instead of the crap they're producing now, which is remakes and sequels. But he did say the reason they're doing that is because Hollywood's being run by bean counters now, instead of the creative people that come up with these new ideas. The bean counters say, ooh, well, according to my abacus, if you do this, there's greater risk, and so we can't guarantee financial returns. We can't guarantee we're going to make the money back that we put in to make the movie. So if the movie costs, say it's a small little independent film or an indie film, and the budget was $10 to $25 million, well, they can't, the bean counters can't guarantee that they're going to make that money back. They're not going to be able to recoup that, because they can't factor in new material, unknown actors into their little algorithm. But that's why they're going with, remakes, and they're, redoing stupid things like Ghostbusters, and they're putting feminist slants on things, or they're doing, sequels. It just boggles the mind, and that was, but this actor had been in several major productions. For the sake of his career, I will simply tell you he's been part of the Hunger Games trilogy, he's been part of the Marvel universe, and he's also been part of the DC comic universe. I'm not going to give his name. I'm not going to tell you where he lives. I'm not going to tell you what his parts were. He shared that with us, but I'm not going to out him and wreck his career and cancel him because he dares to be conservative and a Republican in Hollywood, which extorts the virtues of pedophiles and wokeism. So he did say there are a shit ton of conservatives in Hollywood, and for the sake of their career and the hard work that they put in to get where they are not going to torpedo their career, so they don't say anything. They keep their mouth shut. And so there you have it. But during our discussions over the 3 days that we were there, woo! Because I'm doing the podcast, they thought that was just interesting as all get out. They were like, "You've got a podcast?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man, I'm on episode 65. I got an intro, I got an outro. I do preparedness shows midweek, and I do, the Biden Jackassery Minute, which was what the segment was originally called. Now I just call it the Jackassery Show for the weekends. And they thought that was just funny as all get out. And on the way down, after I I met my buddy at his house over in Lillington, North Carolina, and then we drove the 3 hours over toward Beaufort, toward the coast. He and I were just talking, and I was like, dude, I talked about that on my podcast. And he was like, what? All right, let's go, So I got my phone out, and we were listening to podcast episodes, and I'm holding the phone up, and he's just laughing his ass off, right? So I got to episode 63, where I lost my mind, and I dropped 4 F-bombs, right? And then we did episode 65, and he looked at me, and he goes, dude, where's the F-bombs? And I was like, well, I got a pretty diverse audience, and there may be kids in the room. I don't want to be out here just stomping my feet and screaming at clouds and dropping F-bombs and things like that. He goes, you know what I would love to hear, Dave? I would love to hear this word. And he told me, and I was like, ooh. Why do I enjoy that word? I don't think I could share that. It's a derivative of an F-bomb combined with another word that some people might find offensive. As if the F-bomb wasn't offensive enough, the combination to another word might... anyway, so we got an interesting show, and I'm a little concerned with the combination of fuel costs, inflation, and how fuel is going to take us toward a food shortage. And I got a couple clips. One of them's about 5 minutes long. I'm gonna try and edit that down to get the highlights. I don't want to change the young lady's words, but we're gonna have a food problem, and it's gonna be a combination of Ukraine and Russia, and war in Eastern Europe. And, we're in month 2. Maybe it spills over into another country. Maybe it doesn't. But the war's not over. And those 2 countries are number 1 and 4, I think, in terms of wheat exporters. So when you put sanctions on a country and they can't export, or you put sanctions on a country and the other countries aren't going to let your ships into port, you're going to have a problem. Particularly when that product is wheat. So a young lady did a little bit on TikTok, and I actually looked into it, and her facts and figures are right. But I did come across... So Biden literally went on TV. He was doing an interview. I think he was in... I think it was part of this European trip, where he actually said, there's going to be a shift to a new world order. Well, isn't that what we've been saying there, Sleepy Joe? And we've been talking about the deep state, and you just admitted it all on TV, globally? Huh. That's interesting. And you wonder why Americans are telling you to step off whenever you say, we're going to ban their scary rifles and high-capacity magazines. And what, are the deer wearing Kevlar? Idiot. We have those guns for you, jack-off. Not for the deer, or the moose, or the elk, or the bear. What a dumbass. He also went on TV and said the exact opposite of what his administration and these sycophants in mainstream media have been regurgitating from Jen Psaki's notes, which was the sanctions are meant as a deterrent to keep Putin from doing anything stupid in Ukraine. And now he's out there saying, well, the sanctions were never meant as a deterrent. Well, which one is it, Joe? Were they meant to be deterrents and Putin said, get to stepping, I don't care? Or did you lie to us for 2 months knowing that they weren't going to be a deterrent. Can't be both, Joe. This is the kind of shit that we're dealing with, and it's just unbelievable. Some of the stuff that this guy is doing, and it shocks me to my core that 80 million people, bullshit, voted for this guy, bullshit, double bullshit. No, he didn't. But I'll tell you what I am finding on all these little social media platforms and on news channels and things like that. There's a whole lot of people being interviewed, and they've seen what 15 months of jackassery looks like, and they're saying, wow, I did not expect this, and I really regret my vote for Joe Biden. Really? I mean, none of the stuff that we said, not just me, but other podcast hosts, other news outlets and news sources, independent sources, whatever you want to call them, we all told them this is what's going to happen. Well, they voted based on feelings instead of knowledge. One girl was out there and saying, I voted for Joe Biden because they put, because of something that happened in Hamilton. A song in Hamilton. And the guy with the interviewer was like, you know where the words came from for that song? And she's like, well, it was Joe Biden and it was Hamilton. And she had no idea that the words actually being sung in the song came from the United States Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident. She equated those words to that stumbling idiot during the campaign who couldn't even think of all of the words. We hold these, you know what I mean. This is the kind of stupidity that we're dealing with. And you wonder why I rail on education as much as I do. But if the Democrats have their way, and they actually do strip out some of these election safeguards, we're going to be stuck with jackoffs like this in perpetuity. I found an article. It was actually written by Scott Perry. And Scott Perry is a Republican representing Pennsylvania's 10th Congressional District. He wrote this with another gentleman named David McIntosh. And I'm not going to read it to you, but I just thought, this is what the Democrats are trying to do. They're trying to strip election safeguards out. So we have to deal with this shit all the time until we die. Because they don't want to lose power. But here's the thing. Because they know they screwed everything up. People are fleeing the Democratic Party. If anything Joe Biden's administration has done is basically create more Republicans. But I kept this article because I wanted to talk to you about the facts, the figures that are in this document. For example, one of the safeguards that the Democrats want to strip away with their Freedom to Vote Act is they want to strip away voter ID. But yet, voter ID in this country is supported by 81% of voters. But yet the Democrats want to get rid of it. 81% say, yes, we need voter ID. This is POCs, people of color, immigrants, white people. 81% of America think that voter ID is a requirement, is a necessity. And yet they want to get rid of it. 71% will only support candidates that support voter ID. So you get 81% of the population want it, and then 71% of the population says, I won't support a candidate that's trying to get rid of it. Which is an interesting little piece of information. 85% of voters agree that states should be required to clean their voter rolls by removing voter registration lists, the names of deceased people or people who are moved. 85% say every state needs to go clean up its voter rolls. But the Democrats don't want that because they need dead people. They need people who have moved so that that person can vote twice. And the dead people can be voted by a living relative. 76% agree that every mail-in ballot must be received by Election Day. The Democrats want to give you a week to 10 days to get your vote postmarked. The election's already happened. They need that week to 10 days to print more ballots. It's jackassery is what they're trying to do. And then finally, his commentary is that the left knows very well that stripping elections of safeguards is a necessary step towards extinguishing fair elections, which, after all, is their goal the entire time. Because they saw what a pandemic allowed them to do. So now they're thinking, well, we got to suspend all of these voter integrity pieces of legislation through their leftist attorney generals for the 2020 election. They thought, well, if we can suspend them for a pandemic, maybe we can get rid of them entirely. This is the kind of shit we're up against, folks. All right, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to talk about something interesting that I found, a correlation between four people, which makes you go, And then we're going to talk about food shortages and how that is going to come to us via fuel costs. All right, be right back. And now we pause for some shameless self-promotion. If you like post-apocalyptic, dystopian, and preparedness fiction as much as I like writing it, or you just like the show and are curious as to how creative and fertile my mind can be, then pick up a copy of my 5-part fictional series today. In a nutshell, over the course of When Rome Stumbles, Hannibal is at the Gates, By the Dawn's Early Light, Colder Weather, and A Time for Reckoning, I crashed the big ag and financial industries, unleashed some jihadists and the EMP, then spent 20 years trying to evade a socialist dictator. You can get all 5 parts in electronic format from my overlords on Amazon for $20. Paperback pricing is set to Amazon minimums based on page count, so I can't help you there. But for the bibliophiles out there, each part of the series averages about $15. But what if you don't have time to sit and read? Fear not, I've got you covered too. Parts 1 through 4 are currently available in audio format, and Part 5 will be in audio format by summer 2022. if the narrator doesn't quit before then. Audio pricing is set to Amazon minimums based on recorded finished product length. But I have freebie codes for the audio versions, so shoot me an email at djkpublishinghouse@gmail.com to get your freebie codes. Don't wait. Go get a copy of each part of this exciting and action-packed series today. You will not be disappointed. And now, back to the show. All right, we're back. I hope you enjoyed my commercial. Of course, I had to put that one in there because Part 5's being worked on. So hopefully by summer, it'll be done, and we can get the series concluded on audio and move forward. And I can start writing again. I don't know. I've just got a bit of a block because I want to get this done and out the door and off my plate. So I hope the narrator accepts my apology and continues to move forward and doesn't quit. So that'd be great. But I did come across something which I thought was interesting, and it's kind of like, what's that the game? 6 Degrees of Separation from Kevin Bacon or something like that. Well, when I came across this, my first thought was, well, that figures. And here's what it was. Dr. Fauci went to Cornell. While he was at Cornell, one of his roommates was Bill Gates. Obviously, Bill and Melinda Gates are the head of their namesake foundation. Upon graduation, Fauci works his way through the medical community, virology and pathogens and all that stuff, and until eventually he becomes the first CEO of Moderna, one of the vaccine makers. Now, Moderna used to be a German company named IG Farben. IG Farben. IG Farben has been around since before World War II, and in fact, it was one of the companies that was tied into some of the experimentation during the Holocaust. Sometime after the war, I should mention, IG Farben is owned by and operated by and managed by George Soros. Sometime after the war, IG Farben is broken up and renamed to Moderna. So you have Dr. Anthony Fauci, you have Bill Gates, and you have George Soros. As Moderna was growing and looking for investors, one of their chief investors was Jeffrey Epstein. You can't make this kind of shit up. And all of them hated Donald Trump. Now, Epstein got nabbed by the law, and maybe not, killed himself. There's speculation either way. I just find it interesting that the guards happen to be jerking off somewhere and the video camera stopped working. I find that suspicious. Anyway, I thought I would give you that. So you have Fauci and Gates are roommates at Cornell. Fauci becomes the CEO of Moderna. Moderna is owned by George Soros, and Jeffrey Epstein was one of the primary investors in Moderna. That's a weird collection. It makes you wonder, was it Hillary who didn't want Epstein talking about Bill? Or was it a gazillionaire who didn't want Epstein talking about what their plans were with Moderna and Fauci? I don't know. Draw your own conclusions, folks. But here's the deal, right? So we're headed toward food shortages, and I kind of saw it coming, and it's because part one of my book, and that's why I put that commercial in there. Part one of the book series, it's a slow collapse due to food shortages. I love food. I love to cook. I learned a lot of things about food when I was writing a cooking and entertainment book with a chef friend of mine. And that's when my disdain for GMOs began. It became more fully developed. I always thought that they were questionable. I was like, why is science tinkering with my tomatoes and other fruits and vegetables? But so I fictitiously tied GMOs to cancer in part one. I did it in such a way so I couldn't be sued for libel. But now what we're seeing is, so you had Orange Man bad. He makes mean tweets. They get rid of him using a global pandemic. Supply chain problems out the wazoo. We already had product and food shortages because of that. Now, the pandemic magically ends 1 year into Biden's administration. How does that happen? It is magic. He must have found a different magic wand, Barry. So, you have high gas prices because Biden has stopped basically our energy independence. But high gas prices aren't just limited to you and me trying to get around town. Okay? High gas prices lead to high food prices because of two things. One, it costs more to get it from the farm to the distributor to the grocery store, and it costs more for the farmer to farm. I'll give you an example. When you have a large farm operation, you've got a large above ground diesel tank, for example. And the facts and figures that I found for this one particular farm said that in September of 2020, to fill their large tank with diesel cost them $10,000 in September of 2020. To refill that tank this month, this year, cost them $33,000. So what does that translate to? Well, to fill up their tractor, which has 8 wheels on it, it's a big-ass John Deere, and they use that tractor to prep the ground, plow, plant, harvest. Not the greatest on gas mileage. It's a tractor. But it's a piece of heavy machinery that is pulling other pieces of heavy machinery or doing vital functions like harvesting. But in September of 2020, to fill that tractor cost $230 a day. In March of this year, this month that we're currently in, March of 2022, to fill that same tractor based on the $33,000 refill cost, it now costs $765 a day to put gas in that tractor. That's leading to higher food prices because the truck drivers are paying $1,500 to put 200 gallons of diesel in their truck. So the farmers are paying more, not only for their fuel, but for their fertilizers. The truckers are paying more for their fuel to get it from the farm to the table, so to speak. So your fuel prices are going up. And then I found this video, which explains not only how we're going to have higher food costs, but how we're going to start seeing food shortages. So it's about 5 minutes, but I'm going to play it, and you can kind of... she paints it as... well, I should say her friends are trying to paint her as she should not care about Ukraine because it's a white person's war. And so I'm going to play it. So here you go.
Let's talk about wheat. Russia's the largest wheat exporter in the entire world, exporting about $8 billion worth of grain every single year. Ukraine is the 5th largest, exporting about $3 billion worth every year. And it's considered the breadbasket of Europe because 71% of its land is agricultural. And that harvesting land is the size of Italy. Ukraine is also the biggest exporter of seed oils in the world, like safflower and sunflower. Both countries export over 25% of the entire world's wheat. Know where I'm going with this yet? Too early? Let me give you another hint. Russia and Ukraine export their goods from their port cities on the Black Sea. Cities like Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Odessa. Those names sound familiar? They should. The civilians in two of those cities and the cities themselves are currently being invaded, seized, and demolished by Russia, and Odessa is next. War in Ukraine means that its ports closed because it's under attack, which means that crops are being damaged and there's a diversion of manpower because everybody's fighting. So nobody's harvesting the grain, which means that wheat can't leave the country to feed other countries. Need another hint? 95% of Ukraine's grain exports go to Middle Eastern and North African countries. Still a white war? Tons of countries heavily rely on wheat exports, but Egypt is at the top of the pyramid, no pun intended. Egypt gets almost 85% of its wheat from Ukraine and Russia. Tunisia relies on 50 to 60% of its wheat imports from Ukraine and Russia. Turkey imports around 75% of its wheat from Ukraine and Russia. In 2019, Egypt, Turkey, and Bangladesh bought over half of Russia's entire wheat production. Russia and Ukraine are also major wheat suppliers to Nigeria, Lebanon, Yemen, Sudan. Still a white war? Russia's port cities may not be under military attack, but Russia's money, reputation, and ships are under attack from sanctions. That means that countries don't want to do business with Russia because of what it's doing to Ukraine. Countries are banning Russian ships from entering their ports. Turkey has now blocked passage to Russian fleets through the Black Sea Straits, which they control. And when the flow of grain from the world's largest exporter is disrupted, this has a significant effect on the cost of food. And then food prices rapidly rise, which is occurring right now. If food prices rapidly increase in economically unstable countries, this can lead to people not being able to afford food, and then famines can happen. Everything is connected. Still a white war you shouldn't care about? Now factor in global warming, which is creating endless fires, destroying massive amounts of crops, and creating some of the longest droughts that humanity has ever seen. Then factor in an already disrupted supply chain from a pandemic. Prices for food were already high before this war started. Wheat's at its highest level in 14 years, and corn is at a 9-year high. Morocco is a huge wheat and barley producer, but it's in the middle of a 30-year drought, which means that it needs to increase its wheat imports too. Tunisia's down and out, strapped for cash. Yemen and Sudan are economically depressed. Lebanon has 1 month of wheat left in its milk, and Lebanon currently has an 80% poverty rate. You think these people can afford food price increases? These countries now have to frantically rush to find alternative countries to buy wheat from that they can already barely afford. And right now, there are too many countries to list that are walking on the edge of a food crisis. And when you're that close to falling off the cliff of starvation, food prices cannot be disturbed, because if they are, that can trigger political conflict within countries. Rising food prices can cause riots. Food has triggered revolutions when people don't have any. Tunisian bread riots. Food instability in Sudan toppled a president. Still a white war? When countries rapidly have to find alternative countries for their food, import prices are higher. Grain may take longer to get there because it has to go via different routes. Transportation costs are higher, which many of these countries can't afford. Another important point. Belarus is the second largest exporter of potassic fertilizer in the entire world. Farmers across the planet need it because it increases crop productivity and yields so they can feed the world. Black farmers need it too, but Belarus is being sanctioned right now because of its role in Russia's war. So in turn, farmers don't get their fertilizers and their crops are drastically reduced, which raises food prices and makes poor people starve. This war equals global food insecurity, and if it spills over into NATO countries, this war equals the existence of life itself being threatened. Everything on this planet is connected. If you don't know how things work, learn and ask questions.
Well, isn't that interesting? All of the wheat. Now, granted, we grow a lot of our own food, and we are a food exporter by and large. But most of the world is not, and most of the world is reliant on Russia, Ukraine, the United States for a lot of their food staples. And if one country can't harvest and export because their crops have been destroyed, their workers have been killed, or are distracted, with the Russian army advancing toward them, and the other country can't get their goods into port because they've got sanctions on them, that's a bad look. That's going to lead to just what she said. That's going to lead to starvation problems. That's going to lead to civil unrest problems when there's no food. So it's going to, if this shit in Ukraine doesn't end soon, woo, mama, we are going to see some Interesting stuff this summer, because without food, people start getting desperate, which is pretty much what every dystopian, post-apocalyptic author has ever said. When you start having to live life without, and you are not prepared to live life without, such as food, electricity, water, heat, air conditioning. If you're not prepared to solve each of those equations, yeah, you get desperate. And you start doing stuff that you would never even have conceived of doing. This world is going to hell in a handbasket, and Joe Biden is driving the truck. Hopefully he's charged up his battery so he can get the full 300 miles on his truck. And, I found this funny skit. I just thought it was funny. And it's basically, it's one actor, one guy, playing multiple roles. And one of them is a leftist who's defending Joe Biden, and the other ones are just hitting him with facts. And the Biden supporters just deflecting. I just thought it was funny. But it rings with a kernel of truth. So here's that funny video. But, all right, there you go. Here you go.
Gas prices are not Joe Biden's fault. They're 1,000% his fault. They're pretty much solely his fault. The president doesn't control gas prices. I hope you know that when we say Joe Biden, we're talking about the left at large. Didn't the Democrats try to give him credit when it went down like 2 cents? Hell yeah, with that phony graph they were showing. The president doesn't control gas prices. So if gas prices are down, it's thanks to Joe Biden. But if they're up, then it's Putin's fault. Exactly. Wow. Well, the Keystone Pipeline had nothing to do with it. It's a hell of a lot less oil coming from Alberta to American oil refineries. So, did you know that China invested $30 billion in Canada's oil industry while Smokey Joe was vice president? Beijing Biden. That's fake news. Canada's gonna pump that oil with or without a U.S. pipeline. And with no U.S. pipeline, they're sending that oil straight to Asia, cutting America out of the deal. Yeah, and the oil they are sending to America comes on trains and trucks instead of through a pipeline, just burning more gas for less oil. How is that not Joe Biden's fault? Gas is high because of COVID, not the president. I'm gonna need you to elaborate on that. Demand went down and then production went down. Okay. Well, demand went back up and now production can't keep up. So you're saying that when you force people to stay home instead of go to work, and then pay people to stay home instead of work, and then tell them you need a vaccine before you can go back to work, that people are less likely to go to work? Incredible. I cannot believe it. You guys don't know what you're talking about. So wait, is it that American production can't keep up with the demand, or is it Putin's fault? Because it can't be both. Yeah, how do we go from being energy independent to being not energy independent? And now we're importing oil from Russia. Yeah, ask Joe Byron how that happened. It's Putin's fault. Have you been to a grocery store lately? Yeah, people are taking out second mortgages to buy groceries. Is that Putin's fault too? Yes. Unbelievable. This wouldn't be affecting you if you drove an electric car. Yeah, I'm struggling on $5 a gallon gas, so let me drop 50 grand on a Tesla. That'll solve my money problems. Well, then take the bus. Oh yeah, I'm sure all the welders and plumbers and farmers can take all their equipment down to the bus stop and take the bus to work. You guys and your farmers, can't you just shop at a grocery store? Wait, you do realize that groceries get to the grocery store by a truck, right? What do you mean? The groceries, they don't come from the store. Yeah, they get there from a truck, dingus. I'm gonna need to fact check that. You checking to see if Idaho potatoes are grown in Idaho? Maybe he's wondering if avocados from Mexico come from Mexico. What'd you come up with, Lefty? Inconclusive. When the price of gas goes up, everything goes up. And it's all Brandon's fault. And now they want us to drive electric cars. Well, you should. Do you know how electric cars are made? Like where the batteries come from? China. China's the #1 battery producer for electric cars. That's a conspiracy theory. Electric cars use lithium-ion batteries. And now China's moving into Afghanistan, which is sitting on $1 trillion worth of lithium. How convenient. And now every American needs to drive an electric car. And in every one of those cars is a battery that was made in China. How's that for energy independence? One of Biden's campaign promises was to end fossil fuels, and now this is where we're at. But yeah, it's totally Putin's fault. And that's why they call him Beijing Biden.
I just think it's funny. I just, it's got some, well, I mean, every one of the rebuttals to the leftist arguments was based on fact. So I just thought the presentation of it was funny. All right, folks. That's it for episode 67. We'll be back midweek with Preparedness Show. And so stay safe, stay warm, keep your head on a swivel. I'm out.
Happy Hunger Games. And may the odds be ever in your favor.